Welcome everyone. We're just going to give it a few seconds for everyone to trickle in. Thank you for joining us. We are thrilled to see everyone here. My name is Susan Gettert and I'm with 1000 Friends of Wisconsin, and I am just excited to start off our webinar series today. I'm going to start sharing my screen so you can see our presentation. I think we've got everybody muted. Also feel free to turn your camera off to avoid distractions. But we're happy to see you. So today's presentation is about safe routes, safer communities. I am joined by Carrie Edmondson from Wisconsin Rapids and Adam Kuhn from Stevens Point. And we're going to share about a couple of projects that we worked on together in the second half of 2022. So before I get going with all of that, I want to encourage everyone to sign up for the next webinar. That is February the 14th. Please note that that is Tuesday at 11:30, so a little different than our usual time. And we'll hear from a tri-state presentation of climate planning and transportation. So our own Greg May from 1000 Friends will be speaking, along with some folks from Minneapolis, Cedar Rapids, and others. So if you want to sign up for that, please click the link in the chat or watch for the follow-up communication after this webinar. A little bit about our organization, in case you're not familiar with us. 1000 Friends of Wisconsin was founded in 1996. We were originally a task force appointed by Governor Tommy Thompson with the purpose of passing smart growth legislation in the state. And since then, we've been working on good land use planning, transportation equity, climate planning, all of those things that advance healthy communities, good economic outcomes, and environmental benefits in communities across the state. We also have the program Active Wisconsin, which we took over in 2020, just before COVID hit. Active Wisconsin is a program that is a coalition of communities and advocacy groups from all over the state who promote active transportation infrastructure and programs in cities and towns. So that means that we want it to be safe and accessible for everyone to walk and bike and take transit, regardless of their ability to drive a car or regardless of their income or anything like that. So we do that with sharing resources and advocating statewide for policies that support equitable active transportation infrastructure. You can follow us on social media. You see our handles there at the bottom of the screen. And honestly, the best way to keep up with what we're doing and what webinars and things we have coming up is to sign up for our e-news. So if those links are not in the chat, Greg will be sure to send those out after the webinar with the follow-up communication. So moving right along to the main event, I want to introduce our presenters. Myself first, my name is Susan, my pronouns are she, hers, and I'm Community Programs Director here at 1000 Friends. I run the Active Wisconsin program and do a variety of other things, such as this project. We will also hear from Carrie Edmondson, who is Associate Planner with the City of Wisconsin Rapids. She helps develop and implement land use plans and programs to make Wisconsin Rapids the best place it can be. Carrie began her career in Greater Los Angeles, where she got her Master's of Public Administration, began work as a city planner, and started to think quite a bit about how interactions with the built environment shape us as people. Some exciting planning work that is building momentum in Wisconsin Rapids involves historic preservation, public art, and bicycle pedestrian infrastructure. So some of that you'll hear about in a bit. Our other presenter is Adam Kuhn, who is the Associate Planner and Zoning Administrator for the City of Stevens Point, a position he has held since 2020. Adam has a bachelor's degree in Public Administration and Economics from UW-La Crosse and a master's degrees in Urban Planning and Public Administration from UW-Milwaukee. Adam strives to promote safe, accessible, and interconnected forms of transportation to achieve Stevens Point's strategic goals to develop a network of creative nodes that serves and strengthens our neighborhoods. So if you have questions throughout the presentation, please put them in the chat. Greg will keep an eye on that, and we will make sure there is time at the very end to get to those. I forgot to mention that earlier. So safe routes, safer communities. I'm going to kick things off by just explaining what this whole thing was about and why we did it. It was a project that's part of a larger health equity initiative with COWS, which is the Center on Wisconsin Strategy, a think tank based out of UW-Madison. And we were specifically looking at routes to schools and parks for children and families. So the idea here was, what are some of those key public places that multiple generations of people need access to? So the invitation went out to the entire Green Tier Legacy Network, which is statewide. And we ended up working with 2 cities, Stevens Point and Wisconsin Rapids. It's total coincidence that they're both located right in the middle of the state. Green Tier is statewide, but this is just how it worked out. And the project ran for a little over 6 months, starting in June of last year and wrapping up in December with the reports. So I won't go over this whole timeline with you all, but it just gives you an idea of how things rolled out. I spent a lot of time looking at data, reviewing plans, meeting with people from the city to refine exactly what areas we were looking at. But I want to highlight the 2 bolded items here from July and October, which were the opportunities I had to travel to both cities in person and take tours of the places we were looking at. So in July, I was meeting with planners and just a couple other key people to see what some of the initial areas of concern and potential focus areas were. And that helped inform the planning for more in-depth walk roll audits that happened in October. So what we were doing was looking at really specific areas in the city, either at intersections or a stretch of a street or a specific park, and really digging in deep as to what the issues there were and what improvements could be made to improve routes to those places. And then the audits were conducted with a small group of city staff and advocates and others who were able to offer different viewpoints and different perspectives as to some of the safety issues that we were discussing. So I want to back up a bit and just explain what this has to do with health equity. So if you're a planner or a public health person, this probably comes as second nature to you, but sometimes these connections aren't always like automatically out there. So health equity really encompasses a whole lot of different things. And we know that there are many social determinants of health. These are basically systemic or outside factors that impact your health outcomes that you don't necessarily have personal control over. So some of the most commonly known ones I have listed here. I think race is probably the biggest factor for health outcomes for many people. But one of the things we did as part of the data review was looking at different demographic data and environmental justice data and pulling that together by census tract. So you can see a couple of screen grabs here from both reports of like percentage of people with disability, percentage of people who, households that don't have a vehicle. All of these things impact people's ability to get around, their access and mobility, and that in turn has a really big impact on health equity. So some of the barriers to good, safe access to transportation options and mobility in general, some of those barriers are tangible, things like whether or not your neighborhood has sidewalks. And then some of those things are intangible, such as fear of gender-based violence or racial profiling or cultural issues. So for this project, we were really looking at literally the concrete barriers to access, the pieces of the built environment that affect the routes and the safety of people who are getting to these places that we were looking at. The last thing before I hand it over, I just wanted to mention this tool that was pretty important for our planning. The AARP has a walk audit toolkit. By the way, sometimes we'll refer to walk roll audits. So basically we're talking about anybody who is outside of a motor vehicle, whether they are actually walking on 2 feet or using a wheelchair or some other device. AARP has this toolkit. It's been around for a while, but they revamped it last year. It is very user-friendly. It has lots of pictures and really good explanations of things. And it comes with a whole set of worksheets. You can see this one on the right of the screen. I know that the print isn't showing up very clearly, but essentially these worksheets are used for different kinds of intersections or different places that you might be assessing. And it's a checklist of many different things that you would look to assess safety. Things like, is there a sidewalk? Is the sidewalk in good condition? Are there a lot of driveways interspersed and interrupting the sidewalk? Is there a street lamp in the middle of the sidewalk? Are there pedestrian crossing signals? All of these details that actually make a really big difference when it comes to safety. So the worksheets weren't necessarily perfect for us, but they provided a really good guide and framework for discussing the focus areas that we were looking at. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carrie Edmondson from Wisconsin Rapids, and she will talk a little more specifically about her community and the work we did there.
Great. Well, thank you, Susan. Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be with you all here today. As Susan said, my name is Carrie Edmondson. I'm an associate planner with the City of Wisconsin Rapids. I want to thank Susan and the rest of the 1000 Friends of Wisconsin team for leading this grant process and also for leading this webinar to kind of summarize the results and get to share the process with all of you. So I'm very excited to talk with you about how this looked for the City of Wisconsin Rapids. And as I talk, please note any comments in the chat. It's always fun to hear from other communities about what works well, what doesn't, experiences you've had that are relevant. That's one of the best things about working in municipal government as a planner, I think, is sharing ideas with other communities and learning from each other. So to get started, I just wanted to summarize some community highlights about the City of Wisconsin Rapids. So as was said earlier, we're located in central Wisconsin in the heart of cranberry country and a lot of other industries. We do have an abundance of natural resources, most notably being located on the Wisconsin River. And we do have extensive park facilities, including the newly constructed Witter Park Aquatic Center, which is featured in the photo. And this was also one of our locations. And Witter Park also has a skate park, a new playground, pickleball courts, and is the home field for the Wisconsin Rapids Rafters baseball team. So going on to the next slide, we do have a history of bicycle and pedestrian support in the city. And I wanted to highlight a few of those strides that we've had. So we do have good momentum coming in. And that was one of the nice things about the opportunity for this project is it has helped us to kind of build on that momentum. So one of the first things that I wanted to share with you, we have a very successful River Riders bike share program. We have 5 stations within the city. We have another one outside the city that's located within our interconnected trail system. This is a successful program run by Wood County, and I did put a link to their Facebook page in the chat. They have a maintenance team for the bike share stations. They have just great marketing on their Facebook page about events. They have events that are led by fire, police, lots of community engagement, lots of different opportunities. And so there's 2 stations in Wood County, there's 2 centers of stations. There's some in the city of Marshfield, and there's some in the city of Wisconsin Rapids. And just to paint a picture of the success of the program, last season they had 850 rides. So that's kind of the scale of this program. And I was actually talking with the coordinator a little bit this morning through email, and there was another pretty sizable county within the state that was looking at the Wood County program as a kind of benchmark. So it is kind of a forerunner in the state in the area of bike share. And then going on to the next slide. Another kind of exciting, new initiative that we have around bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure is we just completed installation of phase 1 of our wayfinding signage program. And these signs, we have a variety of styles. I mean, you can see a couple of the styles here. There are pedestrian kiosks, there are trail signs. We also have some parking signs and some other signs, but there's a lot of wayfinding information. You can see the signs on the left and the right contain a map that includes a lot of various points of interest, the trails, distances to surrounding communities. And so this has been a really great thing to kind of integrate our trail network, inform people about the trail network. And phase 2 is actually in the final stages now, and installation will be beginning shortly on that as well. And then moving on, this is upcoming very quickly. In a couple weeks, we're going to be submitting our first ever bicycle-friendly community application to the League of American Bicyclists. We're very, very excited about this because we feel like we have a lot of great things in place, and we haven't necessarily benchmarked it. And bicycle-friendly community or anything like this is always just a great way to learn more about where we're at, what we can do to best move forward. And so we're really excited about this. And this project was just great timing. We have momentum in this area, and it was a great way to kind of build on that. I heard a planner say once that, we all have our certain projects we get really excited about and, we want to do, but we also really need to know what has momentum and what has traction if we want to move things forward. And this is great because it's something I'm excited about and something that has momentum. So moving on to the next slide. So as you can see, the Safe Route, Safe Communities work was very timely for us and helped us to continue the momentum around bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. So when Susan was talking about visiting for the walk audits and the site visits, one of the main things as a community, of course, that was important is to identify locations and which locations we felt were the most relevant for this type of work. So we have a couple different scenarios. I mean, we have some areas, of course, as you all know, that are highly activated, areas that we want to promote and highlight, but they don't necessarily have great multimodal network connectivity. So that's kind of one area. And then we have the other category of underutilized or underactivated areas. And so we did a little bit of both, as you'll see with our locations. So our first location is the site of our farmers market. So this location is an existing one-way local street within the city that runs parallel to the Wisconsin River. And the outdoor farmers market operates here twice a week from June to October. Now the farmers market has been operating since 2005, but this location only since 2021. And of course, the importance of farmers markets cannot be overemphasized. I mean, we have connecting people to healthy food. We have just the connectivity that happens with people, with sharing ideas, learning about people in the community, entrepreneurs getting a chance to begin businesses. And there's a health impact assessment that's being finalized now, and included in that are positive and negative impacts of a permanent structure being evaluated as part of this process. So knowing that, in part, that this potentially could become a more permanent location, we really felt it was important to have this identified as one of our locations. And you can see in the photo the location, and then the lower photo is a really nice, you can see the people and the tents, and it's just a very popular, busy event in the city of Wisconsin Rapids. And next slide. Our second location was a little more obvious. This is kind of like space activation on steroids. This is a recreational hub that includes, like I said, our aquatic center, skate park, new playground, pickleball courts, and it's also the home field for the Wisconsin Rapids Rafters baseball team. So this in terms of a park space goes without saying. There are many, many different people, activities, et cetera, that are drawn to this space for a variety of reasons. So this was a location that was pretty easy to identify. The harder part, because of the size of the location and some of the features surrounding it, which I'm going to get into in a minute, made it a little more extensive to kind of hone in on what do we want to really be looking at here. So 8th Street South, you can see marked on this map, is kind of your real typical 80s, 90s auto-oriented corridor. So it's a lot of pole signage and a lot of parking lots and asphalt, you know, right up to the curb, and very automobile oriented. So that, in this street in general, is needed to cross a lot of times to get to various points within the city. I mean, it kind of runs north and south through a main part of the city. And so this is one area that we definitely wanted to focus on. And you can see the hatched corridors that run east and west. Those are on-street bicycle lanes. The purple cross-hatched north and south connecting routes that you can see that are connected to Witter Park, those are marked pedestrian routes in the city. So we also wanted to look at those and say, how pedestrian friendly are these really? They were identified as part of our mapping process when we were compiling our wayfinding maps. We know we want them to be pedestrian routes, but we also want to look at them and say, how great are these pedestrian routes, basically? So that's what we were looking at with this location. And next slide. So this is an example when I was talking about highly activated spaces and then spaces that we maybe would like to be more activated. This would be a space that we would like to become more activated. This is a quiet residential location in the northeastern part of the city. It's a larger park. There's a fair amount of infrastructure, including a band shell and disc golf. But access to the park is unclear, within the park is unclear, both in terms of if you arrive by automobile, where do you park, where do you go, where's the stuff? And then walking to the park within the park is also pretty unclear. Next slide. So now moving on to recommendations, I just want to note that this is where it was very helpful to have someone from outside the city to walk these locations with us, provide a different perspective, an outside perspective, both in terms of identifying issues and formulating recommendations. So for each of these locations, I'm going to be hitting on some of the highlights, things that kind of jumped out to me from the plan. And then, of course, when you review the document in its entirety, there's more to it. But these are kind of some of the things that I thought were interesting to highlight. So going back to that first location, so that farmers market location, if you remember, it's on the one-way local street adjacent to the river, high point of activation. So there were infrastructural deficiencies that we noted for sure when we were doing the walk audit and we were looking at things. But another pretty significant component is it just is kind of it's beautiful along the river, beautiful space, but in terms of farmers market location, there was just a kind of a need to create a sense of place. So some of the recommendations included things such as incorporation of artistic sidewalks, pedestrian and bridge lighting, installing public art projects, building sheltered seating, and then more green space, parkway trees, street trees, you know, creative placemaking strategies to make it feel more like a place in and of itself. And this just dovetails really nicely with a creative placemaking. It's a public art and creative placemaking plan that we're wrapping up right now, and actually put a link in the chat to our draft plan. And we, of course, I love an opportunity to plug this plan because we put a lot of time into it, but it includes a public art inventory. It's all digital and interactive. It's a story map. So you can view the different public art that is currently in the city. And then we did have public engagement as part of the process where people could give their siting preferences and we could look at preferences in general. So it also contains some of that information. And so I really like this tie-in to, you know, looking at this from a infrastructural standpoint, but also from a standpoint of creating a sense of place. And it makes sense because the farmers market's a longstanding point of activation within the community. We know about the health benefits. We know about providing fresh, locally grown food. It's also a community gathering space where people can share ideas. And it makes sense that, you know, the creative placemaking goals would tie into this. So I really liked these recommendations in addition to the infrastructural recommendations that were made. The next slide. So this, as I said, this location in general is a little more extensive and complicated. It's a larger location. There's a lot going on. So just to give you an idea, in that aerial photo, the largest photo, the aquatic center is the area to the right. You can tell, you can see the pool. The baseball diamond you can see to the left. The skate park would be in the southeast corner to the lower right. And then the pickleball courts are the upper right. So there's a lot of different activities. There's a lot going on. When we looked at this location, it's just the infrastructural recommendations are paramount. Both of the circled intersections are in need of improvement. The Apple Street and A Street South intersection is the one to the north. And there were intersection recommendations, you know, high visibility crosswalks, some tactile indicators. A lot of things weren't in the proper place. There maybe had been like a street improvement and something had kind of been added in or pieced in, which I think happens a lot in our communities. I mean, I think realistically, I mean, we're looking at costs, we're looking at a lot of factors, but in terms of these intersections really being what we would ideally like to see, I mean, they're not there. And the one to the south, the Chestnut and 8th Street one, I think even more so is just a really crucial intersection to get access to this park. And again, high visibility crosswalks. We were almost in the intersection to push the walk button. And some of the examples to the right showing the high visibility and the tactile indicators, and any and all of this would help to improve these intersections. The area to the south that's kind of blocked out in a rectangle, that area has angled on-street parking, very wide road, could easily have a road diet of, you know, creating parallel parking, creating bike lanes, giving the illusion that it's a narrower street, slowing traffic. Surrounding the park, there was just a lot of need that we identified in terms of infrastructure. Those pedestrian routes that we saw on the earlier map, those crosshatched purple north-south routes, those I would say, I liked the point in the recommendations about them needing infrastructural improvements. And again, kind of that sense of place, you know, kind of making it a clear pedestrian route that's inviting, that people want to use as a pedestrian, that you know you're going from wherever you're at to the park. I think the locations make sense on the map. I think there's a bit of work to do to make them an inviting pedestrian path. And I like the idea of wider sidewalks, curb ramps, even creative placemaking. A story walk was one idea that's really cute because it's actually near the library. Which should just be a really neat way to kind of integrate a lot of things in that same area. So I think there's a lot of really good work that could be done moving forward to improve this location. And next slide. So this was kind of our underutilized space in need of activation. So the overarching recommendation was basically to create a master plan for this park. And I think it's a great one. I mean, I think without knowing where we want to go in terms of capital improvements, what we even want this space to be, how we want people to use this space, it's difficult to really formulate specific recommendations. I think that was a really good recommendation. So as we know, you know, master planning helps us get input from stakeholders, community members, and identify capital improvement goals. And these are all things that would be needed to really make a really substantial improvement, I think, in this area. So likely, if that were done, it would include things such as street lighting, wayfinding within the park, and then just identifying the other goals that we would have for this area. It's a beautiful, large space. It's just, you can feel it. It's just not there's a lot of uncertainty when you approach the space and when you're within the space, and a master plan would be a great step in the right direction. And next slide. So looking forward, so this is always the key, right? Is we want to know where we're going to go with this. So like I said, the public art and creative placemaking plan is being finalized. I'm excited about this tie-in with some of the creative placemaking strategies and suggestions. And in terms of infrastructural improvements, I think a lot of pedestrian and bicycle improvements, it's getting in on that front end, you know, when things are being scoped, when things are being looked at conceptually, to really get ahead of, to get these things integrated really early, I think is the best way to see it come to fruition. So, you know, making sure that planners are a participant in the process when looking at street infrastructure projects, and then, you know, just really being sure that these bicycle and pedestrian initiatives are prioritized. And otherwise we keep with our auto-oriented spaces, because that's still, I think, kind of the natural go-to. So in terms of wish list, A Street South Corridor study. So this is one of my, anyone who's talked to me about City of Wisconsin Rapids planning, this is one of my big wish list items. I work in Wisconsin Rapids. I live in another community where I'm a plan commissioner, and we have a similar type, like every city does, but auto-oriented corridor that's very geared to automobiles. And a couple of years ago, we did a corridor study, and it was very, very beneficial. And I can already see the benefits. It's difficult with these developed spaces because the structures are in place, you know, the parking lots are in place, but there's still a lot that we can do. And some of it is pretty low hanging fruit. I mean, depending on the nature of the project and what the spaces are like. And it's kind of back to that master planning. I mean, if we don't know where we want to go, or we want to be go from here, it's difficult to get there. So I would love to see a corridor study there, and then a master plan for Robinson Park if we really want to look at how we want to move forward with that park and what we want for the park space. That would be a great first step. And next slide. So I just cannot say enough. If anyone here hasn't had a chance to work with the 1000 Friends team, I just really encourage you, if you get the opportunity. I mean, they've been wonderful. Sometimes with grants, you don't know exactly how much, you know, what it's going to mean. And it's just been great. It's been a great experience, and I can't say enough about Susan and the team. And I want to thank COWS and Green Tier Legacy Communities. And then I do want to thank our walk audit team and our task force. We had representatives from the school, the city, local disability and sustainability advocate. You know, these collaborative partnerships are just make such a difference. Anytime we can get the different perspectives, we just end up in such a great place. You know, it just ends up so much better when we can hear kind of all these different voices. So I'm just really thankful to this team for taking their time and contributing what they did. And I did put my email in the chat, and please feel free, you know, ask questions in the chat today, but also if you want to follow up with anything after the fact, I'd just love to talk more and hear more from any of you about your experiences and ideas. And I will turn it over to Adam.
All right. Thank you, Carrie. And thank you, everybody, for spending some time this afternoon to be a part of this webinar. Before I get started, I want to give a couple shout outs as well. First off, Susan and COWS, the tremendous work that you've done working with the city for the last 6, 7, 8 months or so. Just extremely proud of the work that you've done. I'm extremely proud of the final report that you produced with us. So I know, just talking with some of our bike ped commissioners, they were really surprised and really pleased with the amount of effort that's been that you've been taking over the last few months. I want to thank, as I alluded to, our bike ped commission. You know, they've been involved from the very beginning, working with Susan to kind of develop some ideas as to how our project would be structured, what's going to be the route that we're going to go, and ultimately reach the final report that Susan created for us. And lastly, I want to thank all of our participants for the walk audit that took place this past October. Mike, Mark, Trevor, Carolyn, Madison. Hopefully you learned a lot. Hopefully your eyes got pretty open in terms of some of the challenges that we face in our project area, and some of the opportunities that we have as well in the next few years. So as Susan mentioned in the beginning, Stevens Point, located smack dab in the middle of Wisconsin. Some neighboring communities, Wausau to the north, Wapaka and the Fox Valley to our east, Village of Plover to our south, and then our friends from Wisconsin Rapids to the south and west. So on the next slide, we're going to focus a little bit more on the city of Stevens Point. Again, our municipal boundary shaded in red. So we have a more vibrant, compact downtown, which is really reminiscent of a lot of cities that are located along the Mississippi River, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail later. So Stevens Point, like a lot of other communities, is really framed by the transportation networks, arterial streets that really create and transform our local economy. You have Interstate 39 running north-south that you see on the screen. You have Highway 66 that runs more in a northeast-southwest direction, and then US Highway 10. So you can see the project area that we'll be talking about extensively over the next few minutes. We'll be focusing on the downtown, but I also wanted to talk a little bit about the transportation networks and how they relate to the downtown. So Highway 66, it's a little hard to see on the Google map here, but it does run up to the downtown, around the downtown, and then exit the city on its west side. US Highway 10 used to, several decades ago, run straight through the middle of Stevens Point, went around downtown, and then exited the city's west side. And I'll show you a little bit more in the next slide as to how that looks. So some of the other project areas that we looked at before focusing on the downtown, one of them was a redevelopment site of a former religious convent grounds. There's been work going on over the last few years as far as an adaptive reuse project for the former convent building, along with redeveloping the convent grounds for some mixed use commercial buildings, plus some additional single and two family uses and live workspaces. So seeing how, knowing this future development will occur in this area, how will the integration of this former convent site work with a new parkland that's currently under construction, along with really the built environment, the surrounding more older part of the city of Stevens Point. The other project location that we were focusing on was PJ Jacobs Junior High School, located in the middle, roughly in the middle of the city along Michigan Avenue and Main Street. Now, this is one of the areas that was more prone to vehicle and pedestrian crashes, looking at the data from WSDOT over the last few years. So, as folks know, pickup drop-off locations during school days is a hectic time. So what are ways that we could improve the built environment, the intersections, the crossing locations within a half-mile radius from the school? Now, that was one of the areas that we focused on, but we ultimately, as I mentioned, focused on the downtown area. So on the next slide, you'll see the project area, the downtown, as I talked about. So really these smaller, compact buildings with the black roofing, the white roofing, really represents the heart of our downtown. There's lots of shops, bars. We have our Matthias Mitchell Public Square located in the middle that you can see on the screen. Now, on just a little bit to the west of downtown, we have a lot of natural resource amenities, namely the Wisconsin River. We have Piffner Pioneer Park to the north and east, Cultural Commons, and then the Green Circle Trail, about a 27-mile recreational trail going around the city of Stevens Point, Village of Plover, and surrounding jurisdictions. Now, the focus of the project is really centered on this chunk of Water Street that is located between Centerpoint Drive and Clark Street. Now you can see really the big observation is just how wide that street is in comparison to the other streets within and surrounding the downtown. Now, just to put some perspective, the width of this right-of-way along Water Street is about 135 feet. Now, as you know, practicing planners on this call know, roughly the average right-of-way width is about that 60, 66 feet or so. So you're talking over double the width of right-of-way for the western flank of our downtown. And that really poses a challenge in that we have all of our downtown amenities. We have a lot of destination points downtown, but we also have destination points along the Wisconsin River as well, parkland, recreational trails. But you have this, as we coined during our walk audits in the final report, this concrete moat essentially dividing the two areas. So it's not inviting at all if you're a pedestrian, if you're a bicyclist who wants to, say, venture downtown, stop at some of our shops, cross the street, and hook up onto the Green Circle Trail. It's just not inviting at all. And you'll see in a couple slides from out really the true case, the true reason why that's the case. Now, as I mentioned before, US 66 and US Highway 10, those two highways really formed and shaped how our downtown has developed over time. So Highway 10, US Highway 66, that is, still runs up to and around downtown, hugging Centerpoint Drive, Water Street, and then exiting the city on West Clark Street. Now, on the next slide, you can see that, while Highway 10 used to run through downtown, several decades ago, the US Highway 10 actually was rerouted by the state DOT. So it's a little bit harder to see, but if you're traveling westbound on US Highway 10, you'll go through Custer, enter the city on its east side. But the actual US Highway 10 route is to hook up onto Interstate 39, wrap around the northern extent of our city, head north, and then merge off of Interstate 39 back onto Highway 10, roughly between Stevens Point and Mosinee, which is just a little bit south of Wausau. So that really lies the challenge is any reroutes of highways that takes place either on the state level or the federal level, it has a lasting effect not only on the local economy, but really the built transportation network that takes place. So we knew for really ever since the reroute took place, we knew through anecdotal evidence that this chunk of Water Street, as you'll see on the next slide again, is really overbuilt when compared to the traffic demand for this chunk of roadway. We knew that for several years now, but last year we actually worked with an engineering consultant to conduct a feasibility report and a traffic study for this area, which essentially proved what we already knew, that this area of Water Street is overbuilt. You can reduce the number of lanes based off of the traffic study. So that really lies the problem. A simple solution would be, hey, Adam, hey, City Stevens Point, reconstruct the street, make it more safe, make it more accommodating based off of existing traffic demand, and really help bridge that divide between the downtown and the riverfront. Unfortunately, there's a lot of challenges to that. Obviously, funding is a big component. Reconstructing streets is super expensive. I know when I was going through schooling, the old adage was 1 mile of city street costs about $35 million to redo. And this includes obviously utilities underneath as well. And I'm sure, as prices have increased over the last few years, that figure is likely more. And another reason is more so just based off of the life expectancy of this roadway itself. Now, it's not a new street per se, but really the life expectancy of this chunk of Water Street is about 15 to 20 years. So in terms of our capital improvement planning, yes, we recognize that there's a need, but based off of the life expectancy of the street, it's farther down on the totem pole in terms of priorities. So really the purpose of this project and working with Susan, 1,000 Friends, was what are some short-term solutions that we can do, that we can implement right now, that can withstand the length of time over the next 15, 20 years until when we need to reconstruct this street, and even possibly incorporate some of these improvements as part of our reconstruction plans for this chunk of Water Street. So the 4 circles that you see on the screen here really represents the 4 conflict points, the 4 intersections for this chunk of Water Street. And, you know, the middle 2 is not as major in terms of conflict points, but, you know, the northernmost one, the intersection of First Street, Second Street, Center Point, Water, you know, that really reminded me when I first moved up here, took this job with the city several years ago. You know, living in Milwaukee, you always see the memes, you always hear the stories of, you know, a first timer driving along the interstate, approaching the Marquette interchange and seeing all these signs up above saying, okay, if you want to hook up onto this street, you got to go this way, this street. If you want to hook up on this street, you got to go this way, that way, that way. This intersection of Center Point, Second, First Street is sort of like that on a much smaller scale, in that when you're driving along Center Point, you're seeing these signs that says, if you want to go westbound, you got to hook up here. If you want to go straight, you want to hook up here. You want to go back into the downtown, you got to go here. And, you know, when you're first driving through this area, it's very confusing for a driver, let alone somebody trying to bike Center Point or even walk to try to hook up, say, from Mid-State Technical College over to the riverfront. So on the next slide, we're going to focus on one of these intersections here. This would be the intersection of Water Street and Crosby Avenue. So on the next slide, you'll see just the street view of this intersection and what we're talking about here. You can see, first off, it's a super wide street. 2 lanes northbound, 2 lanes southbound. You have dedicated bike lanes, you have turning lanes, and there's really a lot there. And so just for some context here, the back, you're looking straight towards the western extent of the city's downtown. Our backs would be to the Wisconsin River. So just imagine a pedestrian trying to cross this street, cross from the Green Circle Trail into downtown. Just imagine a bicyclist trying to cross the street, hooking up back into downtown. It's not bike friendly, it's not pedestrian friendly. So what are ways, and really the purpose of this project, what are ways that we can really make it more friendly, make it more inviting, more accommodating for these multimodal users? So during the walk audit, you know, that was a really fun time of really learning what works well, and more importantly, what does not work well in terms of being a pedestrian user, being a bicyclist, and trying to cross these intersections. Now, as Susan mentioned, walk audits are also known as walking and rolling audits. And thankfully for this audit, we did have a wheelchair that was provided for us. So we can really try to cross these intersections while using a wheelchair, really to see the full grasp of how difficult it is to cross the street. So on the next slide, we're actually going to show you a little video from Trevor Rourke. Appreciate you, Trevor. I know you're on the call here. Appreciate you being our guinea pig to see just how difficult it is to cross the streets. But Trevor's on a wheelchair and trying to cross the street from downtown, heading west back towards the river. So we'll play the video now and just, you know, keep some observations, see how difficult some challenges that Trevor came up with just by crossing the street. All right, so you could probably keep this on replay as I talk a little bit. So a couple observations you can see right here. First off, this pedestrian landing area in the median, that's not a level surface. So as you saw Trevor navigating over that, through the median, you actually saw him, the right side of his wheelchair actually lift up a little bit. And on a somewhat decent day where road conditions are good, that's sort of manageable, but nevertheless, there are still some issues in terms of tipping it over or just trying to be more careful of crossing that or bypassing that landing area and going actually into the roadway in order to cross the street. Another observation as well is, you can see Trevor's putting a lot of energy into this. He's hoofing it as fast as he can to try to cross the street. But right about now is you can see the light turns yellow. So by the point when the lights at Crosby Ave and Water Street turn green for motorists on Water Street to head north and south, he's still in the street. So that requires motorists to hopefully either stop and let him cross or risk some potential problems that we don't even want to think about. Next we'll talk about really as you're entering, you just saw the tail end of it. We'll wait a little bit until we get there. But as Trevor's navigating the second half of the street, pulling back onto the sidewalk, it's not a level surface. The grade from the street when you're hooking back up onto the sidewalk doesn't meet the slope requirements through the state DOT, through the Americans with Disabilities Act. And you can probably head up, go to the next slide now. A couple observations that we found, first off is, these concrete medians, while it's a nice thing to have, and I commend our traffic engineers at the time, several decades ago when the street was first constructed, or when the street was last reconstructed, that we installed medians. Now the issue is more so because of the pedestrian landing. As you can see, one person in a wheelchair, it's really not big enough. So you're exposing yourself within the two travel lanes, which is obviously, as you all can think, is not safe. And I'll just imagine a group of a couple people trying to cross the street. There's not a sufficient space to accommodate people staying in that landing area and trying to cross the street once a car goes by or when the lights turn again. Another observation, push-to-walk buttons lack audible prompts or the countdowns. For the countdowns, it's pretty difficult to understand really how much time you have as a pedestrian, as a bicyclist, to really gauge, whether you have enough time or whether you should pick up the pace. And then the audible prompts as well, when focusing really on the equity aspect of it. If you have hearing challenges, hearing disabilities, having or if you have vision challenges, I should say, having the audible prompts would really assist in, again, understanding how much time you have, making sure that you have sufficient time to cross the street. Next observation is really the placement to these push-to-walk buttons relative to the curb ramp. For some of the intersections where we audited, the separation was about 6-10 feet, which obviously is not ideal. You want to have, if you're somebody in a wheelchair, you want to have these push-to-walk buttons to be as close to the curb ramp as possible, just to preserve that navigability for folks in a wheelchair to press the button and wait till the lights turn again so you can cross the street. As I mentioned, significant non-compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that's, again, focusing on an equity standpoint. There's a lot of things that we could do better in this section to really bridge that divide. So one of the things that I like about this project, working with Susan, working with 1,000 Friends of Wisconsin, is that it really sets a roadmap as to what are some specific projects that we could do in the years ahead. And I know, we'll be having some discussions amongst myself and our Bike Ped Commission about applying for the Safer Streets and Roads for All grant as part of the bipartisan infrastructure Act that was adopted in late 2021. So having some specific implementation projects would really go a long way to boost our standing, boost the odds that we would be awarded an implementation grant and see some of these deficiencies turn to solutions to really bridge that divide between the downtown and the riverfront. So that's about it. So I guess I'll kick it back to Susan to take it from here.
Thanks. All right. You know, I think one of the big takeaways here is that the devil is in the details. We were really looking at a lot of those details. I think with planning, a lot of times we're looking at big picture stuff, you know, 20 or 30 or 50 years down the road, so to speak. But with this, we were really getting granular and looking at, you know, one curb ramp and then the next curb ramp and push buttons and all that. And, you know, these things that can actually make a pretty big difference for, you know, for somebody who is trying to just walk from one place to another. I would like to bring everybody's attention to the fact that we do have reports with all this information. We used StoryMap to create them. Shout out to our operations director here, Robin Wagner, who put everything in StoryMap. I basically handed her all the information and she made this beautiful thing to look at. So we'll send the links out with that, with the follow-up materials from the webinar. And you can see the sort of cover pages here for each of them. I also just, thanks again to both Adam and Carrie and all the people who accompanied us on the walk roll audits. It was so useful to have those perspectives. We had advocates from the disability community in particular, which, you know, using that wheelchair, it's not the same as actually needing to use a wheelchair on a daily basis, but it gave, you know, those of us who tried it just a glimpse of some of the challenges of getting across the street when you have that. So I'm going to stop sharing because then I can look at the chat. I think we have a number of messages in here. And I think there were some questions that have been answered along the way. So Greg, if you've been keeping better track than I have, perhaps you can help suss out what needs to be answered in our last 2 minutes or so.
Yeah, Carrie has been doing a good job of going through and answering the questions as they arose. Kind of the one question that hasn't been remained, and I'm not sure it could really be adequately addressed in 2 minutes, is how does equity fit into these plans? And you know, what were some of the more challenged neighborhoods?
Yeah, that's a big question. I'll take that one and just say that, so Adam and Carrie, you can chime in too. That's a tricky one. We looked at, one of the things that we were doing to collect data was looking at census tract data of various demographic factors and environmental justice factors. And those are all included in the report. Given the timeline and the scope, we weren't able to do like a deep analysis and really dig in. I think that is something that I would like to follow up and do more with, seeing how these improvements would actually impact some of these communities that have been, that have not been prioritized historically. But it was, you know, in choosing the locations, we were looking at, you know, where are the places that people are going? What are the popular places and how are people accessing them? I can tell you that that Robinson Park location in Wisconsin Rapids was definitely adjacent to lower income community, and that could be part of the explanation as to why there were not sidewalks or wayfinding signs there, even though it has the potential to be a really well-used facility. We looked at crash data. That was another factor in helping us decide where to look, and there was actually a bike car crash adjacent to Robinson Park where there weren't sidewalks. So yeah, I hope that helps answer the question. And there's a direct message here from someone who's asking, I'm in a smaller community of about 5,000. What is the best way to improve our safe routes? The WSDOT actually has a new grant program they are launching like now. I think they have webinars that either went live or are about to. about safe routes specifically for communities of 5,000 or smaller. So I would check WisDOT for that. And the person who messaged me, if you want to email me, I can try and find more information to follow up. So it is 1 o'clock. I think we probably need to wrap up. Please sign up for our e-news. Please keep an eye out for follow-up with a link to recording and contact information, link to the reports. All of that stuff will be coming to you either later today or early tomorrow. You can find our contact information on our website. Any questions you have, please follow up there. And thank you for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.